Okay, so we're in chapter 3 of Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel, and we were talking about the different wives, and we said that uh, he had Achinoam and his son Amnon. Then there was Abigail, and he had that son Kilav, who was named that way because the boy looked exactly like him. And we said that the boy looked exactly like him, so that there would be no doubt that David had been the father of that boy, having had the baby with Abigail shortly after she became widowed when her very gruff husband Naval died. And we said that David deliberately had waited 3 months' time before being intimate with her so that uh, there would be no question as to who the father was. But for the purpose of slanderers wondering, well, who is the father? So God made the baby look exactly like David, and that's why he got named Kilav, Kamo Av, just like the father. The third was Absalom, Avshalom, the son of Ma'acha. And that's where we kind of left off last time. And when we did Ma'acha and the story of Avshalom, we mentioned that Ma'acha was the daughter of a king, King Talmai, of the Geshur nation, Geshur. And we mentioned that she was a Yafat Toar, that David took her at the end of the battle as part of that battle. And we learned the laws in Judaism of Yafat Toar, the Torah's laws that in biblical times, it does not apply right now in today's life and world. There's no Beit HaMikdash, and we talked about that many of these laws don't apply now. But at that time, uh, if Israel went to war and someone encountered a woman that was exceptionally beautiful, we went through how the Torah says that you can bring that woman home and she has to cut her hair, she has to shave it completely and completely remove her adornments and cut her fingernails to the and she mourns for 30 days, and we went through all of that. And after all that, if the man wants to marry her, she can be converted to Judaism. And in the case of Ma'acha, the daughter of Talmai, the daughter of Talmai, of King Talmai, Melch Geshur, the king of Geshur, she became a mother, gave birth to Avshalom, Absalom, whom we said will turn out to be a disaster, an absolute disaster. And the rabbis, and when we talked about Yifat Toar, we pretty much completed the conversation. I wanted to show you one more very interesting commentary, and that's what we start with today. This is Radak. Radak was a great commentator of David Kimchi. He's one of the great biblical commentators, particularly on the Navi, on these books of the prophets. And he's commenting here on Avshalom ben Ma'acha. He's commenting on a lot of things, but the one I'm going to share with you is this comment on Avshalom ben Ma'acha, on the birth of the son Absalom, the son of Princess Ma'acha. What's the deal with her? Dorshubo, ki lefi shehaya ben Yafat Toar, shelakacha David b'milchama. Our rabbis taught that because Absalom was the son of a Yafat Toar, a very beautiful woman who was taken during war, whom David took as a wife during the course of war. She was not Jewish, from Geshur. He had to follow all the rules and requirements we learned last week. And she then converted, took on Judaism, etc., and became his third wife, according to the order that the wives are listed. There are other, as we said, there are some who say she wasn't third, she was fourth, whatever. Okay. But the rabbis say that because David took her as a Yafat Toar, not like a regular taking of a wife, but taking a non-Jewish woman because she was beautiful during battle, Leficha Chaya Avshalom Sorera Moreh, the Aviv. For that reason, the child born of that union grew to become rebellious and defiant against his father. As I've already hinted to you, there's going to be horrific tragedy coming out of Avshalom as he grows older. He's going to lead a rebellion against David. We've talked about it. We'll get into it far more detail when we get to it in the text. But the rabbis are talking now about laying a foundation for understanding what went wrong later with this boy, with his son. And a lot more went wrong, just beyond the rebellion. He was a sorera mora. We learned about that last week. A son who was defiant and rebellious against the father, and steals food and steals wine and drinks stolen wine and drinks stolen meat and is defiant. And we went through all of it. And we said, L'chach nismacha parashat sorera mora leparshat yafat Torah. And we even said last week that the reason that the section in the Torah that talks about a defiant and rebellious son appears immediately after the section that talks about taking a woman in battle to be a wife. Lomar lecha kol hanosei ota o isha she'ena haguna. It's to come and teach you, say the rabbis, that any man who marries a woman that is not appropriate for him, lo haguna, not aguna with an ayin, but haguna, who's not appropriate, not worthy, or who takes a wife in the course of battle and marries her. But in other words, who marries more out of a lust than out of a conscious decision to marry someone of character, who will be a wife who will share similar values to his, so that they can rear children, have and rear children of the character and values that are important to have. Someone who instead marries based on more superficial considerations, yotzei mimena ben sorera mora, from such a marriage ends up coming a defiant and rebellious son. In other words, you have to be careful when you get married. By the way, it goes both ways. Here we're talking about David marrying women. It goes true of women marrying men. There are women who make the mistake of, like, they get attracted to a bad boy. In college, they marry these bad boy types because they seem more exciting and more fun and less boring. And yeah, in the beginning, it probably is true. But down the pike, when you have children and the children grow up, do you want your children to be bad boys also and bad girls? Thinking, for example, of, I don't think about her often, but for the purposes of this, I've always been fascinated by the news that would come out about Pamela Anderson. Two of them always had interested me, Pamela Anderson and Heather Locklear. Pamela Anderson was at the height of her fame, famous for what she was famous for. And she was famous for that. And she really could have married any of a lot of men. A lot of men would have married her without really getting to know her. And she ends up marrying a drummer named Tommy something. I forgot his last name, maybe Tommy Lee. And she ends up getting divorced. And it turns out in the news, they're writing about why she got divorced, because the guy beat her up all the time. And you say to yourself, there is a woman who, because of the superficial realities of her situation, she's got more choices when marrying than the average woman marries. So why does she marry a guy that's going to beat her up? Gets divorced, marries another guy. Of course, what happens? Eventually, he beats her up. I don't know if she ever married a third time, or at least took karate. And the same thing for Heather Locklear. Heather Locklear, at the height of her fame, was in the ABC series Dynasty. And she was also considered a bombshell. So who did she marry? Yeah, she married the same drummer who beat up Tommy Lee. So, you needed to stay in practice. She got married again, and he beat the goodness out of her. And she got divorced. And who did she marry next? Someone else to beat her up. And I say to myself, I come from a different world. Not every guy that I know in my universe is such a good husband. A lot of them are, maybe most of them, maybe almost all of them. And the women in my universe are very good women, very high quality. I don't personally have a lot of personal knowledge and experience of men or women who beat each other up. I know some cases that ended up in divorce. My first marriage did not work out as well as my second. When Ellen passed away, I have another wonderful marriage. But marrying people that beat them up. So what we're seeing is the Torah is warning us, if you marry based on superficial considerations, instead of looking at character and quality of a person, the more superficial things, this is a bad boy. This is a physically outlier woman that is, you may be making a big mistake. And that's why we clergy, for example, of all faiths, are taught, for example, or at least encouraged, if we know of a couple that comes to us to get married, we don't just mark the date in our calendar to do the wedding. I mean, like for me, I do like 6 sessions before the marriage, prenuptial sessions, not only halachic, not only religious, going through some of the laws of marriage, and there are all these laws that have to do with going to mikveh and all these laws, but I work through 6 sessions of pre-marriage counseling and making sure they've talked certain things through. How many kids are you planning to have? It's fascinating. Couple wants to get married. They set the date. They got the venue. Everything's figured out. What color what color the tablecloths are going to be, and what the flowers are going to be, and they still haven't talked about their ideas of how many kids they want to have. So you have a session. Pardon me, I still have a little bit of the coughing from that bronchoscopy. So you're having a session. How many kids do you want to have? And one of them says, well, we talked about it. We decided there's overpopulation. We're not going to have kids. And the other one says, well, I thought we said we're going to have 4 kids. And then we have a conversation. And you force people to talk things through. You have to talk it through. What, are you going to get married now? Now you're going to find out we're not having 4 kids? What, while I'm married to you, I have to have 4 kids with someone else? I mean, so you have to go through this stuff. And a lot of people do not go through premarital conversations, and very important. And what we're learning here, for example, is, according to Radak, Nachon hu hadrash. Radak says this rabbinic drash, this rabbinic learning, that a man who marries a woman simply because she's physically gorgeous and he takes her in battle under the laws of Yafat Toar, the beautiful woman captive in battle, ki me achar shehi shavuya, well, inasmuch that she's essentially taken as a captive in battle, harehi k'muchrachat lashuv ledat Yisrael. It kind of goes almost without saying, and indeed it does go without saying, because it's not said, that in converting her to Judaism, she's going to be muchrachat. She's going to basically be coerced. It's not like a person contacting me, Rabbi, I'd like to convert to Judaism. And I was searching online, and I see that you're someone who's involved with conversions, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And we have a conversation. Here's a woman who really that morning of the battle, not having expected to be taken prisoner and taken a wife, she's not thinking of converting to Judaism. All right, so David takes her, and he follows the Torah law, and she cuts her hair, and she cuts her fingernails, and she mourns her parents, yada, 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 and she converts to Judaism, but she's muchrachat l'shuv l'dat Yisrael. She's being forced, in essence, to convert to the Jewish religion. You want to say, how can you get forced to convert? See it all the time. Not in the Orthodox world. That's what goes on all the time in Reform and Conservative, especially Reform, but Conservative too. Jewish guy wants to marry a non-Jewish woman. Parents still are from enough of a tradition that they say, we want you to marry a Jewish girl. It's not prejudice, it's not racism. We want to have grandchildren who are raised with Shabbos and kosher. If you marry a non-Jewish girl, or vice versa, if Jewish girl marries a non-Jewish boy, the children are going to grow up in a house where there's not a consistent religious identity and environment. And by the way, all because you have the house kosher. That's not the whole name of the game. If you don't believe, you don't believe. It's really about believing in God and believing in the program, right? Getting the memo from Mount Sinai and believing and living it. So you'll have parents that'll say, "You're not marrying a non-Jewish girl." "Oh, yes, I am." "Oh, no, you're not." "Okay, you know what? You can marry a non-Jewish girl, but we're taking you out of the will, and you're not going to inherit dad's business." Oh, oh. Next thing you know, it becomes like a joke. You go to the Orthodox rabbi, "I'm going to be written out of my father's will if Kathy doesn't convert." And then the rabbi talks about, "Oh, I'm glad to be involved. Do you believe in God?" "No." "Do you want to live a kosher life?" "No." "What brings you here?" I want to inherit the business." Now they go to conservative rabbi. It depends on what conservative rabbi is. But by the time they get to the reform rabbi, it's sort of, we're no longer talking about God. We're just talking about price. Here's what I charge for conversions. And then they do conversions. And this is muhrachat. This is a forced conversion. Not like in the Crusades of 1,000 years ago, where the Crusaders took a sword and put it at the throat of a Jew, "Convert to our religion or we'll kill you," or during the Spanish Inquisition of the 1490s, where they would burn you at stake if you didn't convert to their religion. Or what we just learned in our Sunday class a few weeks ago about what they did in Islam. And for example, the Muslim community in Persia of Mashhad, who were forcibly converted. There's different kind of mukharachat. No one's putting a knife at your throat. No one's putting a gun to your head. But you're being told you're going to get cut out of the will. And so you're being forced to convert. And so this goes on all the time. People converting until reform made it even easier. After a generation of telling people you don't have to believe in God, but we'll convert you anyway. Now you don't even have to convert as long as it's a Jewish father. Leave the wife alone. Let Marilyn Monroe stay non-Jewish, okay? And let Elizabeth Taylor stay non-Jewish, and stop asking them, well, because they're good actors, to act Jewish. And you could call it kids, reform says you call them Jewish anyway. But what we're seeing here from Radak, and this is not like a unique learning of Radak, this is Judaism 101. When you take that beautiful woman in captivity and marry her and force her to become Jewish, liba lo nachon el hadat. Her heart is not in it. She's honest. I'm doing it because King David says I have to. But my heart's not in it. But he's v'haneta yotzei demut hashorish. And so the branch or the sapling grows like the root from which it comes. And that's why I ended up with Avshalom the way he did. So then we continued beyond that, as we were learning, we're going to learn Ralbag on 3:5. See if we have it here. Okay. And we talk about that next wife, Eglah. So Eglah is number 5-6. Bahashishi Yitra'am le'Eglah. Sixth of the children is Eglah, Eshet David, the wife of David. We talked a little about it last time, but I didn't show it to you in the text of the Radak. I want to share with you this Radak, Ralbag rather. So what happens here is Ralbag says that on the question, why is she referred to as Eshet David? What is it about her that that leads her to be let's just get this out here and let's see if we get it right over here. Now, what is it about her that leads the text to call her Eshet David, David's wife? After all, they're all being listed here as the wife of David. So what's different about her, Ralbag explains, Amruz Saul, Amruz Zechronam Levracha, our great rabbis of holy memory taught, Ki mipnei zeh amar Eshet David. Why does she alone, as among all these wives, get referred to as Eshet David, David's wife? They're all David's wife. Why bezu levad lo ba'acherot? Why only with regard to her is she referred to explicitly as David's wife and not the other wives? Ki hi hayata bilti re'uya, ki imla David. See, she was unique in that no one else was allowed to marry her in the whole universe except for David. Why? Lefi shahayata eshet Shaul, because she, Eglah, had been the wife of King Saul. According to Jewish law, as it's learned in Rambam's Hilchot Malachim, the laws of the kings, no one is allowed to marry the widow of a king of Israel except another king of Israel. And some say not even that. But everybody agrees no one else. On last Thursday, we had a 2-hour class preparatory to reading Megillah. And we learned a whole bunch of things in Megillah. And you can find it online, by the way. And if you can't find it on YouTube, drop me a note and I'll send you the link. But it's 2 hours, but you can watch a little at a time. And you have about 360 days till the next reading of Megillah, unless Mashiach comes first. And we were learning that when King Ahasuerus, Ahasuerus, was trying to find a new queen to make as his queen in the succession of Vashti, he had a national beauty contest, and for something like close to a year, every night he had another one of the candidates brought into his palace, so that night he could spend the night with that woman in an intimate way. And we also learned with Esther, she pleased him especially, so he chose to marry her. And what became of the others? We learned the rest of them remained unmarried the rest of their lives. They were sent to Ashkaz, Shomerha Pilegesh. They were sent to the house of the concubines, people who had been intimate, let's say, with the king or with other men, and who never again would be allowed to marry. So a wife of a king could not marry. So once King Saul died, what became of his wife or wives? So according to one opinion, they couldn't marry again. And the other opinion is they could only have married another king. So there's only 2 people possible: Ish Boshet, who succeeded the House of Saul, but you're not allowed to marry your father's wife. That's Leviticus 18, Vayikra Perek Yudchet. Not allowed to marry your father's wife, whether it's your biological mother or even a stepmother. So Ralbag says it refers to her as Eshet David, meaning that David was the only one capable under Jewish law of marrying her. All right. Kamosha Amru, and then he cites a verse. I'm not going to take up more of the time, but the bottom line is Vehimnei Almanuto Shamelech Eina Ru'ya Ki Imla Melech. The widow of a king of Israel is not permitted to marry any other man except another king of Israel. V'yidmeh gam ken ki harashim asher lakach b'Yerushalayim v'Pilegesh ka'oshamar. And Ralbag elaborates on it. We don't have to do that because you have lots we want to cover. So let's cover some more. But that gives us a new insight furthermore into Eglah. And it tells us that David married, according to a mainstream opinion, the widow of King Saul. So isn't that interesting? Let's just think and absorb this a moment. King Saul, it began years earlier that King Saul is deciding whom David can marry. And he gives his daughter Merav to David to marry. And then he changes his mind and gives Merav to someone else and gives Michal, which is a woman's name. Michael is Michael. Michal is a female name. He gives Michal to David. And then he takes away Michal and she ends up with Palti ben Layish. Although they never get intimate, that's another story. And then she's back. By the end of the day, it is David who is married, where Saul was sort of controlling David's life and whom he gets to marry. In the end of the day, David is marrying Saul's widow. Interesting how life unfolds in unexpected ways. And things work out certain ways that when you look at them in retrospect, you kind of get it. Now, there's more about Eglah and this is said. Let's look at it in Bereshit Rabbah. In let's just get the right one. 82:7. Okay. In Bereshit Rabbah, we'll take questions later. I got a lot of material I want to first cover. In Bereshit Rabbah, they talk about that Eglah apparently may have died in childbirth when she gave birth to that son. And it discusses that there were 3 women in the Bible, at least, who apparently died of childbirth. Rabbanan, Amrei, Kevar, Habar, Matsui, Va'onanak, Shamim, Ara, etc. Vatelid, Rachel, Vatakash, Belidata. And so, first of all, there was the tragic story of Rachel, our matriarch Rachel, who died en route to Eretz Yisrael when the family had left the house of Lavan, Jacob's uncle and also his father-in-law. And now they're going back to Yitzchak in Eretz Yisrael, and they get past Esav. And we talked about that just recently, both in the context of Tuesday nights and in talking about Megillah last Thursday, the whole thing with Esav and bowing down and everything. En route to Eretz Yisrael, Rachel died near Ephrat as she was giving birth. That's why she's buried separately from the three patriarchs and the other 3 matriarchs, who all 6 are buried in Hevron in Morada Machpelah, Cave of Machpelah. She's buried in Bethlehem at Kever Rachel. So she died. Shlosha hein shenitkashu b'shat leidotan. So there are 3 biblical women who had travail and difficulty during childbirth, umetu kashehin chayot, and died as they were giving birth. The Eluhen, and these are they: Rachel, just mentioned, the Eshet Pinchas, the wife of Pinchas the Kohen. It's part of a midrash. It doesn't appear explicitly in the text. As you recall, Aharon, the first Kohen, Aaron, the brother of Moses, had 4 sons: Nadav and Avihu, who died tragically in the Mishkan. It's coming up in the weekly Torah portion. And then there was Eliezer and Itamar. And from Eliezer came Pinchas. And Pinchas got married and his wife died. And the third, Michal bat Shaul. There's a midrash that the daughter of Saul, Michal, that's the one that Saul gave David, the daughter he gave David after taking away Merav and then giving Michal. There's a midrash, it's not explicit in the text, that Michal died in childbirth. She had not given, and we talked about it a little bit last week. Janet had raised a different question last week, and I'll take Janet to your question later on. But we talked about Michal and did she die childless? Did she have children? Didn't she have children? And I mentioned last week, and that's part of why I'm bringing you the actual text, because I just said it over last week without text in front of me, that there's one opinion that she did have a child, another opinion that she never had a child, but that she reared the children of her sister Merav, so the Torah considered it as though she had been their mother as well. And then we just talked about Rachel Vatelid, Rachel Vatakash Belidata. We just talked about how we know that, and talked about it's in 1 Samuel. I'm not going to go to the text now for time reasons, where they learn out that the wife of Pinchas died while giving birth, and Michal. So what's the deal on Michal? So the deal on Michal is that in addition to the 6 wives that are listed here in chapter 3, Michal will be listed in chapter 6. And it will say, Ule Michal bat Shaul, lo hayola valad yelet ad yom mota. That for Michal, it's going to say in chapter 6, verse 23, when it discusses the different wives, there's an encounter and a horrible husband-wife argument between David. By now, Michal, by chapter 6, Michal is brought back to David to be his 7th wife, in some ways his first wife, and they're very close. And then something happens, and she tells him off, and he tells her off, and the next thing is she ends up without any children, it seems. David answered Michal, it was before the Lord, this chapter 6, 3 chapters hence, it was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father. It got to a very bad argument. I mean, you know, I want to teach you all a very important thing about fighting with someone that you like. You get to an argument. Never use the word you, Y-O-U. No matter what you say in an argument, you want to hurt somebody's feelings, they really got you angry, say it without using the word you. Say the same horrible thing. Not that I'm encouraging you to say horrible things, but if you leave out the word you, it's a whole different thing. You are an idiot versus how do you say you were an idiot, but the rabbi said I can't say you are an idiot? Well, that's a stupid comment. That's still strong. To tell somebody that's a stupid comment, that's very strong. But it's not like saying you are an idiot. And then there are nouns stronger than idiots that just if you know that one thing, that comes from rabbi pastoral care training. And I just threw that in for free. Very, very important. Now, what happens here is they get into a very bad argument. And the next thing you know, he's telling her off. You're talking to me like this is husband-wife stuff, but it's a bad husband-wife moment. And he says, in the course of their argument, it was before the Lord. So you, Michal, just said that to me? Well, let me tell you something. It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his family and appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. So I will dance before the Lord. When I want to dance, what happened was he was dancing and she said, you embarrassed me. And this is him responding. And she's saying, you dishonored yourself. You're the king of Israel. And look how you dishonored yourself and you're dancing in the street. I'll dance if I want to dance before God because I'm celebrating a great victory God gave me in battle. Don't you tell me I can't dance, and I'll dishonor myself more, and I'll be low in my own esteem. But among the slave girls that you speak of, I will be honored. Michal was angry that he's dancing a tremendous dance of victory. Imagine, I don't expect this is going to happen, but imagine they finally get into Rafiach, and imagine they finally wipe out Hamas and Rafiach. Imagine they finally stop talking about it, and they finally stop holding press conferences every day. This is what we're going to do, and imagine they finally do it, and they actually do it, and imagine on top of that, no civilians get hurt, and yet they wipe out every Hamas guy, and they wipe out all the towns. And Netanyahu is so shocked that it worked so well that he ends up in Jerusalem the next day dancing in the streets, just by himself, doing like a Chabad rabbi on those telethons and starts dancing with John Voight. And he can't help himself. And imagine Sarah Netanyahu's wife looking out from the balcony, says, and she sees all these young women cheering and going like this. And she says, you made a fool of yourself. And what he's basically saying is, when I wipe out all of Hamas and Rafiach and don't kill a civilian, okay, I'll dance all the dancing I want to dance. And I don't care if I dance and all the women in the country and all these slave girls cheer me on. I'll dance. But you won't have the joy that they have. So that's what happens. You get started with the word you, and it becomes angry. And so here's the point why we're doing it now. So he says, I'll do it, but among the slave girls that you speak of, I will be honored. And to her dying day, Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children. So the rabbis divide, as they seem always to have more than one opinion. And that's not something just to joke about disrespectfully, but it's because we love the Tanakh. We love Torah so much. We scour through every word for every hidden meaning and every hidden, we try not to make up stuff, but this hidden text. And so when it says, Lo hayala yelad ad yom motah, she didn't have a child to the day she died. One opinion is she never had a child. She died childless. And the other opinion is any woman who dies in childbirth, that's true of any woman who dies in childbirth, that she did not have a child until the day she died. Rachel did not have a child until the day she died. So that's the Midrash on that. We continue. As we continue in this discussion, I've made several references just to refresh your memory really quickly First of all, that whole story of Merav and Michal, because we learned it months ago. Some of you joined our class only subsequent to that learning, and others, understandably, we've learned so much in so many months that certain things kind of fly by. And that's why sometimes it's good not to just go back over and over and over and over, but to go back a little and take a second look to reinforce what we've learned. We saw that when Saul, when Saul, after Goliath, that David took down Goliath, and we saw that Saul saw that David was growing in national popularity and everything. And Saul saw that David maskil, like from Seichel, David was wise and succeeding. By Agarmi Panav, Saul began to fear David. Maybe this is the one whom God intends to replace me. Indeed, he did. Meantime, the whole nation loved David. He was more popular. It's like what's going on now. The Democrats are going to run Joe Biden. The Republicans are going to run Trump, assuming they're both healthy. One of them is going to be president elected for the next 4 years. And most every popularity poll tells you that they're among the two least loved people in America. But one of them will be elected president. Sometimes it happens that the leader is not as loved as someone who's not the leader. All the more so when it's dynastic and the people just don't like that king so much. And they like another guy more. So Vayomer Shaul el Davidi nebiti Havdullah mirav. Ota ten l'chal isha. So Saul wanted to keep, what's that thing that is quoted from The Godfather? Keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. By the way, that never appears in The Godfather, just as it never appeared in the entire history of Star Trek. Never once did Captain Kirk say, "Beam me up, Scotty." Certain lines just take on a life of their own. So what happened here is that he decided to keep his enemies closer by having David marry his daughter Merav. So Eten l'chali shall give you Merav. And you'll be a great general in my armies, fighting the wars of God. But his real purpose was, I'll put David in the front line of battle to maximize the probability he gets killed in a war, get rid of him, and no one will suspect that I was acting out of malintent, because after all, I gave him my daughter as a wife. So Visholamar al Tehi Yadibo, I don't want to strike him dead myself. Utibo Yatplishtim, I'll let the Philistines kill him. And then there's a back and forth. And for reasons we won't take out the time now, because just too much to learn and not enough time, but Saul changes the plan. As he was going to marry Merav over to David, last minute he instead gives it to Adriel, a different gentleman. And that's the man to whom she stays married, to the degree that there's a Gemara that says that Michal raised Merav's children. Those are children born to Merav and Adriel. But to Ehav Michal bat Shaul David. And the second daughter, Michal, she actually loved David, where Merav was just part of Saul's strategy to keep one of his daughters like an inside spy. Michal actually loved him. So when Saul heard that his daughter Michal has given out the word she actually loves David, he thought that would be fine. So he gave David over to be married to her. And then in Sanhedrin, in the Gemara Daf Yud Pet Amud Bet, in Sanhedrin, the folio 19b, where it says that Saul initially gave over Michal to be married to David. So on folio 19b, Daf Yud Pet Amud Bet, we learn more about that, because later Saul takes her away from David and gives her to this gentleman Palti ben Layish. And we learned that in great detail months ago. Janet at the time had asked about the marrying of Michal and taking away Michal, and marrying at the time Avigail, but isn't he married to Michal? We went through that in great detail, but I did not at the time bring in the Gemara. I will now. Ketiv Palti or Ketiv Paltiel. there's one place that this gentleman, that when it says that Saul took David's wife Michal from him and gave her to this other guy. It says in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 44, 1 Samuel 25, 44. It's not going to just pull up easy, so it's going to make trouble for me. So let's find it. 1 Samuel 25, 44. Let's find 1 Samuel 25, 44. 1 Samuel 25, 44. Give me 25, 44. Give me a. Okay, towards the end. It says, David had taken Achinoam of Jezreel, so both of them became his wives, and Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Palti, son of Layish. Shaul Natan Michal bito eshet David, the Palti ben Layish. Palti, the son of Layish. So back to our Gemara here, the Lama Nikra Ketiv Palti, Ketiv Paltiel. One place the name is Palti, one place in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 15. See if that pulls up easy. No. So let's try to find that. Chapter 3, verse 15. 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 15. 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 15. Vayishlach Ish Boshet vayikacheha me'im Ish, me'im Paltiel ben Layish. The story, David wants that wife Michal back. David sent a message to Ish Boshet. We know who Ish Boshet is. He's that son of Saul, who's the king over the House of Saul, supported and sustained by the chief of staff of his military, Avner ben Ner, Abner. And at a certain point, David sends a message to Ish Boshet. They're from, you'll recall, they're kings of two different parts of the country, right? That's the part that Saul, the House of Saul's over, and this part is David, and he's sustained by Yoav ben Sruya, his chief of staff. Okay, so he sends the message: I'd like my wife back. And so it says Ish Boshet sent and had her taken away from her husband Paltiel. And her husband Paltiel walked with her as far as Bachurim, weeping as he followed her. The king is taking away his wife. And the rabbis, I won't bring up this Gemara now, but the rabbis say, what's that all about? So one opinion is it's emotional. I've been married to her, I love her, and now they're taking away from her away from me, and there's nothing I can do about it because he's the king. And the other opinion is the rabbis say he never touched her. He did care for her emotionally, but it was his understanding that she was the rightful wife of David going way back when. And he perceived it would be an act of adultery to be intimate with David's wife. So even though by order of King Saul, Michal was taken away from David and given to Palti, he would not touch her. He treated her lovingly, respectfully, but he did not touch her, and he cried because, according to the rabbis, he no longer had the opportunity for this act of righteousness. He was a tzaddik, and it enabled him to act righteous, not to touch a woman under his roof, because he felt he's not allowed to. And this great opportunity to win a special place in the world to come, in paradise, he no longer would have the opportunity to continue day after day. And that's the thing that I've never been in that situation. But let me tell you, I was just sharing with one of us a few days ago that one of the thoughts that went through my mind after they gave me my life through God, and they gave me some extra time, is that I'm going to teach better classes. I'm going to go at it better. I'm going to try to expand I used to be satisfied with the local Irvine following. And then I said, you know what, there's a lot of people probably would like to learn with me from beyond Irvine, and God's giving me a second chance. I'll do it. And then when somebody talked to me about YouTube, we're now getting 50 to 70 people on YouTube. Some people started finding it YouTube, then they came to the class. That's the thing. I'm sure when you get an extra lease on life, some people blow it. They decide, great, I can watch more reruns. I could play more golf. I could improve my handicap. And other people, really, I've been given a lease on life. I've been given a chance to do some things I was always going to do, and I never did. So in his case, he's not given a lease on life. And now he loses it once she's taken away. He's still got life, but he's not going to have that mitzvah. So the Gemara says, a tradition with regard to Palti and Paltiel. What does it say? In one place it says Palti, and there's another place it's called Paltiel. Rabbi Yochanan says Palti was his real name. And why was his name called Paltiel? To teach that God, El, saved him, Loma Nikra Shmo Paltiel, She Palto El Min Ha'avera, because God saved him from sin by giving the insight that he may not touch Michal, understanding that she was still David's wife and therefore forbidden to him, despite what Saul tried to pull off. And what did he do? He embedded a sword in the bed. How do you go to sleep with a woman every night or with a man every night, weeks, months, and never touch each other? Even if that's your mindset, how do you do it? So he put a sword in the bed between the two of them. He said, anyone who engages in this matter, namely that, should be stabbed by the sword. And it was the way he did it. And different people have different ways of doing things like that. So we continue, but that teaches us more about Michal and the idea that what happened with Paltiel and everything like that. Now, we go forward with the storyline of the text, and here comes the essentially the end of the House of Saul. So that's it for the commentaries on the wives for now. Verse 6 of chapter 3. Bein Beit Shaul Vein Beit David. The House of Saul and the House of David. And we just looked at that map again, refreshing the map we've seen quite often, how much land that Avner sustained for Saul, for Ish Boshet, who was based in Machanaim, or let's say Givat Shaul versus the Judea area of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Hevron and Beersheba. Okay, so as we go back to the text, the war is going on. The Avner hayam et chasek b'veit Shaul, and Abner was the powerhouse within the house of Saul. Without Avner, the house of Saul would not be able to stand against the house of David. They had far more geographical land. Why? Because David initially had the backing only of the tribe of Judea. But potentially, he might have, and ultimately did, have the support of all the tribes. The house of Saul was very weak. It was standing on a very weak foundation now, because without the strong backing of Abner as their military chief, in a way, it's like the American Civil War of 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Time flies. 150 years ago, the South was so much smaller. How many countries made up Dixie, the Confederacy, versus the Union up north? The Union had more men, and the way they fought wars in those days, that really made a difference. Now, a smaller, comparatively small country like Israel, of 9 million people, can stand up to hundreds of millions of Arabs if you have the right weapons, the right training, and especially the backing of God Almighty and his protection. But if you have all of that, you could do it. But in the old days, battles very often were like that battle I showed you months ago, where Spartacus is overseeing his army against the Romans. And it's basically, you're throwing all your men and they're throwing all their men. And everybody goes at each other. And so if one side substantially outnumbers the other side, they're going to win, because they just go slaughtering each other from up front. But if there's a uniquely gifted general at the top, it makes things interesting. And during the American Civil War, it is universally recognized that the South had amazingly great generals. People like Johnson and Beauregard and Stonewall Jackson, and of course, primarily Robert E. Lee. These were much greater generals until Lincoln finally settled on Ulysses S. Grant after after he felt Meade blew the victory at Gettysburg. Basically, Lincoln had 5 different commanders in chief, and he kept firing each one, legitimately so, because they all were the Peter principle. They all were beyond their pay grade. And so he had McClellan, and he had Joseph Hooker, and he had Burnside, and eventually had Meade. And even when Meade won the war, the famous Battle of Gettysburg, he failed to execute the aftermath and finish off the South. That gave the South 2 more years to fight. So because the South had an extraordinary leadership, particularly Robert E. Lee, they were able to turn into a 5-year civil war, which should have been a 1-month battle. Initially, everybody thought the whole Civil War was going to run 1 month. The very first battle, the Battle of Manassas, the first Battle of Manassas, or Bull Run, with the South calls it, was thought to be such an easy. It was going to be so easy for the North that citizens of the North actually came with folding chairs to watch the battle take place, because they thought it would happen. It would be a 1-hour war, end of the Civil War. And as the North was defeated by Stonewall Jackson, everybody had to leave their chairs behind and had to run for their dear lives. And that's what happened with Avner. Avner sustained the House of Saul. You take Avner out of the question and out of the picture, and that's it for Saul. And you'll see why I'm making such a big point of that here. Because many of us don't even know about Avner. Now you do, but it's important to know. Here's what happened. This is how God directs the course of history, and you don't even see it. Only later, as the war was intensified between the House of David and the House of Saul, Avner and Abner, the son of Ner, was growing in power and strength, and really was sustaining almost single-handedly the House of Saul. Shaul Pilegesh Ushma Ritzpa Bataya. King Saul had a concubine. We talked earlier tonight about King Saul's wife, whom Eglah, whom David later married when she was widowed. But Saul also had concubines. To remind you, a concubine, how does that differ from a wife? How does a Pilegesh differ from an Isha? With a Pilegesh, there's no ketubah. With a Pilegesh, there's no rights. A wife, you have to have a ketubah. A ketubah basically is a prenup agreement. People don't know what it is. People think they get married. It's one of the first things that people do when they come to me to conduct a marriage for them. Rabbi, do you know a good place? Do you know a good artist who does a really nice ketubah? Our budget is, we're willing to spend up to $3,000 on a ketubah. Oh, for you, we'll give you $100 also. Don't think we forgot you, Rabbi. But $3,000 on the ketubah. And I asked them, what are you going to do with a $3,000 ketubah? Well, we're going to frame it and we're going to put it in the living room. It's going to be a beautiful piece of art. I explain to people in a nice, gentle way, because you can only explain to people so much. You know, what like that Tom Cruise line in A Few Good Men. Well, actually, it was Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. It's a ketubah is a prenup. A ketubah says, essentially, if we get divorced, first of all, in marriage, I, the man, have responsibility to provide for your food, for your shelter, a roof over your head, and for intimacy. And if I don't, you can leave. And you can get alimony and child support. And to be even more clear, here is the amount of alimony I'm accepting among myself. I will pay this alimony if we get divorced. And that's what a ketubah is. And it's in Aramaic, so nobody knows what it says. And then you hang it on your wall, the prenup. Here, look, in our living room, we spent $3,000 to have an artist that if we get divorced, I'm going to give her $3,000 a month until she remarries. And I'm going to have to pay $2,000 a month extra for the kids until they're 18, at least under California law. And so that's a serious thing. A marriage is serious. You're taking on a serious responsibility. Pilegesh, a concubine, there's no obligation at all. You don't have to feed her. You don't have to give her shelter. You don't have to be intimate with her if you don't want. You don't have to give her a dime after the divorce. There's no divorce. You throw her out the door. So the obvious question becomes, why would any woman put up with that? And unfortunately, in society, there are social realities, different people, different circumstances. Let's say a woman feels, I'm never going to get married, I'm lonely. Let's say a woman feels, he'll give me children, he's taking me on as his concubine, he clearly wants to be intimate with me, and there's not really any birth control in those days. I'll probably end up getting pregnant, and I'll end up having children. And even if he doesn't want to care for me and give me a ketubah, it will be his children. He'll probably take care of the children, and I'll take my chances. Otherwise, and then if it's with King Saul, so maybe there's another factor. Well, I have the chance to be a concubine to the king, and I don't have guarantees, but it's exciting, and people get into the people. So, I mean, what can I say? So Saul had a woman named Ritzpah, which actually in Hebrew, the word Ritzpah means floor. Her name is Ritzpah, and she was the concubine of Saul. And I'll take your question in a moment, Janet. So Saul had a concubine, Vayomer el Avner, Madua bata el Pilegesh avi. Whoa. Saul has died. His concubine still lives in the palace that his son Ish Boshet now rules over. Ish Boshet has his own wife, but he's got his father's family. It's a big palace, and there's room for everybody. And he loves his father. It's not like there was a rift with his dad. His dad died in battle. He continues the House of Saul, and he kept Ritzpah, the Pilegesh, in the house. And it comes to his attention that Avner has been intimate with Saul's concubine. I'm not saying exactly his widowed concubine, since she never was a wife, she's not a widow, but she's small w widow. She's the concubine of the deceased king. Earlier tonight, I taught you that the widow of a king may not be intimate with any other man, except if in anyone, a subsequent king. Thus, David with Eglah, we learned tonight. But in the case of the concubine, since she never was a wife to Saul, she is not necessarily forbidden to another man after Saul died, because she's not the wife of the king, the widow of the king, but she was an unowned, uncontracted for woman. Even so, she was intimate with the king, and for someone to take upon himself that I'm going to be intimate with that lady, what can I tell you? That's a thing. And it comes to Ish Boshet's knowledge that your commander-in-chief has been, perhaps is being, or has been intimate with your father's concubine, and Ish Boshet, in an angry way, Madua bata el Pilegesh avi. Why have you lain, if you want to use that verb, why have you lain with my father's concubine? And Avner is furious. By Yicharli Avner Ma'od, no, he wasn't very upset. Very upset is when the Mets are leading by 3 runs in the bottom of the 9th, and the other guy hits a grand slam. That's very upset. We're talking now Civil War upset. But Yicharli Avner Ma'od, Avner goes into a rage, al divrei Ish Boshet, for being called out by Ish Boshet, Saul's son, Vayomer. And he says to Ish Boshet, Harosh Kelev Anochi, what do you think I am? A dog? Or a dog catcher? Or a leader of dogs? Asher li Huda of Judea? Let me understand this. You're at war with the house of Judah, Yehuda, Judea, David. But if David had a low-ranking officer come to meet with you, you would treat that guy with some modicum of respect. If it was David's dog catcher, or whatever you want to call it, and he came with a message from David, you treat him with some basic respect? And this is how you talk to me, who is maintaining you on your throne? Hayom, Hesach chesed beit Shaul avicha, elecha v'yel marehu, v'lo himtziticha b'yad David. Look how you would treat somebody from the other side. Me, I do only chesed for you. I do kindness for you, for the entire house of your father, and to your father's brothers, and anybody who ever was affiliated with your father. I single-handedly sustain all of you, am keeping you in power, have kept David from conquering you. But if kodolai avon ha'ishah, and you have the temerity to accuse me now of for what I have or haven't done with your father's concubine, so he takes upon himself a vow, a holy vow, pretty much invoking God's name. That is it. I'm out of here. I have always known that God vowed to David the ultimate kingdom, that ultimately David would be the king of all Israel. And you may remember several weeks ago, we learned some commentary about how Avner knew it, but sustained the House of Saul a bit longer because he was under the impression from a biblical verse in the book of Bereshit, Genesis, that there was a prophecy to Yaakov, Jacob, our father, that Jacob would have 2 sons who would become kings, born after his 11 sons, and Avner understood that meant that Jacob had that one more son, Benjamin, who would have a multiplicity of kings, Saul and one more, namely Ish Boshet. So Avner sustained Ish Boshet, knowing eventually it would be David. So what he's saying is, God vowed that David would be ultimately the king. And now, Cain Eselo, I will make it happen. You accuse me, and he doesn't deny, by the way, that he was intimate with Saul's concubine. You accuse me of being intimate with your father's concubine. That is it. I will la'avir hamlacha hamamlacha mi beit Shaul u'lahakim et kisei David al Yisrael v'al Yehuda. I am going to take and transfer over the monarchy from the House of Saul. I can do this single-handedly. I'm going to hand over the monarchy from the House of Saul to establish and raise up the throne of David over all of Israel and Judea. Midan va'ad Beersheva, from Dan, which is the northernmost part of Israel, all the way down to Beersheva on the very, very bottom. All the way down to Beersheva on the very, very bottom. Dan va'ad Beersheva, all of that will become the kingdom of David, and you're going to be out. And as I finish this, and I take a question, V'lo yachol od lahavshiv et Avner davar. And you might wonder, hey, wait a second, he is the king, isn't he? He is the king. And we've learned from Thursday night class that a king can execute, just give the order to execute anybody in rebellions or anybody who just irks the king. But he can't say a word. He can't say a word. He's intimidated. Mi iratoto. He is so terrified of Avner's power, his strength. Ish Boshet essentially wilts under the fear of Avner and basically accepts that he's going to lose the kingdom. And that's where